Good day, Spartans. Happy Tuesday, April 18th. This is the video lecture and directions for the remainder of the week, beginning April 18th, Tuesday, April 18th. As I said in class yesterday, there are 4 things to do before the weekend and before prom. Get these things done ahead of time, then feel free to be called out for class on Friday. There'll be no new information covered on Friday, nor any new assignments given ahead of the festivities. The first thing that should be completed this week and turned in today is a chapter 3 reading guide that was assigned yesterday. You got a good 20 minutes to work on that, at least I hope. But that should be turned in, completed today before the end of the class period. They should be turn it in if you haven't already done so. The second thing to work on this week is to watch the remainder of this video where I go through the different components of society, of culture. Some of that's a little bit tricky, so I'm going to explain that. And then the rest of the week, you have the third and fourth thing to complete. One is the video and video guide on the Sandlot. That assignment is embedded in the video rather is embedded in that assignment. That should be done by Thursday at the latest. And then the last thing, the fourth thing to complete this week is the Chapter 3 review guide. Chapter 3 review guide is due on Monday, the 24th. Your test is Tuesday, the 25th. Currently, I am scheduled to have a golf match on Monday, April 24th. So if I am not here, if the weather cooperates for once, if I am not here on Monday, there will be another video where I point out some of the more confusing or tricky components of this chapter ahead of your test, which will be on the following day. The one thing that is to be determined between now and then is whether or not you get to use a 3x5 note card on the exam. If I get a good report from Mr. Veith this week, I'll let you know on Monday if you get to use a 3x5 note card for the exam, and you would have obviously the rest of the class period on Monday to complete that and get ready for your exam. So there should be no homework over the weekend. You should not be saddled with any burdens of academic nature in and or around prom this weekend. So chapter 3 reading guide turned in. Watch the video lecture, watch the Sandlot, complete the video guide, help you kind of understand the illustration that the Sandlot has in regards to the components of culture, and then the chapter 3 review guide. Those 4 things before Friday this week. Let's get into it. We need to understand that the culture that we have in society, and any society, is always changing. It's under constant evolution. No greater indication of that than the different examples that you guys provided in the grid for values and norms. Our society, our culture changes, and if our culture changes, our values change, and if our values change, our norms change. This cultural change stems from 3 independent catalysts, 3 different drivers of change. Invention, the invention of new objects or the invention of ideas, discovery, a better understanding of something we already know, or perhaps discovering something new. And then diffusion, getting ideas from other cultures or other peoples around the world. All of these things influence our culture. They influence our culture. Again, they influence our values. If they influence our values, then obviously our norms are going to change. No better illustration of this component or this evolution exists in comparison to the value placed on a 4-year college degree. One of the examples that was provided yesterday in one of the sociology classes, someone had it listed for achievement and success that it would be a taboo to not have a college degree or to flunk out of college. This is a perfect illustration of how culture has changed and how culture continues to change. The value on a college degree is something that has developed and has waned from importance in the last 100 years. A college degree was not something important, was not something valued across our culture prior to the 1950s. People did not need to go to college to be successful in life. There were still plenty of jobs, and there were still ways to make money, livable wage money without a college degree. But that changed in the 1950s. The United States found themselves as a superpower after World War II. The United States found themselves in this global conflict known as the Cold War. We were in things like the space race, arms race, We were trying to prove the success and superiority of capitalism. So we were trying to solve things like, the polio crisis or the cancer crisis. All of these things required advanced study, advanced education, and thus the value was placed on a 4-year college degree. And it's been that way through the 50s and through the 60s and through the 70s and through the 80s and through most of the 1990s. But in the 21st century, we have discovered, right? We have gained a better understanding of what we already know, that requiring or demanding that our entire population receive a 4-year college degree or a 4-year education is not necessary to be successful. And not to mention, it saturates the job market for available careers that are requisite of a 4-year degree. We've learned that people don't need a 4-year degree to have a lucrative, financially lucrative job. We've rediscovered that people can make just as much money as a plumber or an electrician or a machinist or a mechanic or a technician. They can make a perfectly livable wage as a person that works in an office with a communications degree or some other college degree. Right? We've learned that our society, our culture has changed through invention. I mean, we've talked about this in other classes and in previous years. We used to be an agrarian society. We used to be farmers, but technological innovation has changed that. Now, one person with a machine can do the work of 10 or 20 or 30 people. We don't need that many people to be farmers. A machine can do a lot of it. Diffusion. We've gained better understanding of our world and of people through exposure to other cultures. When you think about this holistic approach to health and wellness, our society has gained a lot in regards to human happiness and human health from the Far East cultures, focusing on a well-rounded human experience, exposure to proper, what do you want to call it? Nutrition, exercise, mental stimulation, relaxation. The whole idea of balance in one's life. It shouldn't just all be work, and it shouldn't just all be play. There should be balance. There should be give and receive. Again, it's how our cultures change. Culture changes from invention. Again, it can be the invention of new technology, new objects. It could be new ideas. Discovering a better understanding of something that we already know. Again, a college degree would be a perfect example of that. We've realized that you do not need a 4-year degree to be successful. And diffusion. Diffusion is gaining understanding from other cultures around the world. These 3 catalysts change culture. If our cultures change, that means our values are changing. And if our values are changing, that means our norms, behaviors are changing. We've already talked about non-material culture versus material culture, right? It's the things we can touch versus the ideas. But again, even these things will change over time. And you think about, in the regards to material culture, how much importance previous generations used to play on bigger, more lavish houses, or bigger, faster cars. Not quite the case anymore. A lot of Americans are downsizing because it costs a lot of money to have a big house. It costs a lot of money to have a big car. Some people are giving up their cars altogether, and if they're living in a bigger city, they travel by mass transit. It's cheaper, less headache, but again, it's a change to our society. The non-material culture changes as well. You think about the ideas of marriage, right? Marriage is being delayed. Some people don't get married. Some people just have a partner, and that's who they have for the rest of, that's how they go through life, unmarried. Again, that change can be driven by a bunch of things. It could be invention, it could be discovery, it could be diffusion. It could be invention in regards to marriage, that, people don't have to be married to be happy. Could be discovery, that you don't need a suburban to show that you're successful. Diffusion. We can take ideas from other cultures that you don't need that much space. But again, just the drivers of what changes the current status of culture as we go through the human existence. Every culture has the ideal culture, what their culture would look like in the perfect setting, in the perfect world. And then we have real culture, which is more or less what the society itself has decided as being acceptable. If you need an example of ideal culture versus real culture, you can think about honesty. I would imagine at some point in your life, your parents talked to you about being honest and not lying and being truthful. But at the very same time, I would imagine every one of you have heard your parents tell a lie before. And then you called them out on it and said, hey, what about this whole conversation about being truthful and honest and not lying? And then their response probably was, well, it's just a little old white lie. Not going to hurt nobody, right? Just like Forrest Gump, when Mrs. Gump wanted to have Forrest, do this advertisement about his Flexolite ping pong paddle. Little white lie ain't going to hurt nobody. But it's the same concept. It's ideal culture versus real culture. We have values, and there is no way that everyone, every single day of the year for their life, is going to live up to this ideal set of standards created by our values. It's what we strive for. That's the ideal. That is the idea behind it, but it's not realistic. We live in the real. And sometimes we can't do every single thing that is right. And to some extent, sometimes that's acceptable and sometimes it's not. Every culture is going to have diversity. And it doesn't matter if in the United States, where it's very obvious that we are culturally diverse, or if you're in one of the most homogeneous, uniform cultures in, let's say, one of the Pacific Islands, where there's literally like one group of people that live there. Every culture around the world has cultural diversity. All right. This cultural diversity comes from the fact that there are different social categories in every single culture around the world. You can find a social category in gender. You can find a social category in age. Right? There's social categories in your home. Like you're all Americans. You all subscribe to the same broad scope and sequence of American culture. But yet I would imagine you have a different culture than your parents, right? And we get into this popular versus folk culture. You get into this new versus more traditional culture. All right. Young versus old. Case in point, like you look at the music that your parents listen to versus the music that you listen to. We think about my own existence. My parents were born in the late 1940s, early 1950s, so they're probably your grandparents' age. All right. My parents grew up listening to rock and roll, R&B, Motown, completely different music than my grandparents, who listened to crooners and big band, right? You talk about Perry Como, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Nat King Cole, probably a bunch of people you don't know. But my parents, in their more traditional culture that they had in comparison to mine, or a new, younger age, or a more popular culture, their music was just as extreme as my music was, listening to this competition between Death Row and Bad Boy Records. They listened to rock and roll, and on the mean streets of Mound, Minnesota, on the purifying waters of Lake Minnetonka, we listened to rap. Both newer forms of music, both considered unacceptable by the more traditional cultural norms that our parents had. But it's the same concept. Younger people are undoubtedly going to have this popular culture, newer culture, younger culture, while our parents are going to have, this more folk, traditional, old culture. And music is no, I don't know if there's any more better example of that. I mean, you could go into other examples of types of language that are used. Or in the 21st century, and most of you communicate with each other by text message or Snapchats. You probably don't even talk to the person who's sitting right next to you. You just send them a text message. But it's the popular thing to do. It's the newer thing to do. It's the younger thing to do. But even within a broad scope of culture, there's different categories to it. There's different subcomponents to it. And it can be caused by a lot of different things. Again, gender, religion, age, socioeconomic status, all of these things have an influence on our culture. And because there's a influence on our culture, that means our values are different. And if our values are different, that means our norms are different. Probably the two biggest social categories when it comes to parts of our culture is subcultures and countercultures. And a lot of these, for whatever reason, are going to stem from one of these different social categories that we find ourselves in. A subculture, right? A subculture, perfect example, our parents, the music they listen to versus the music that you listen to, or the music that I listen to, right? Subcultures. We're all Americans. We're all part of the same culture. We all have the same, largely the same values, but there's going to be one thing, one defining or a couple defining components of ourselves that put us in a different category, a different part of our culture. Now, maybe some people are really big into cars, or some people are really big into music, or some people are really big into sports, all American, all part of our culture, all something that, you know, our culture has, but it's that one defining thing that makes us different. That is quite literally subculture. You're going to see the subculture very clearly in The Sandlot, right? They're all American. They all love the 4th of July and Independence Day and firecrackers. But the group in The Sandlot, they're going to be all about baseball. They're going to live, breathe, and die baseball. That makes them a subcategory, sorry, a subculture. The next group that we're going to have, and every culture has it, is this counterculture. For whatever reason, these people want nothing to do with the culture that exists in their society. They're almost like anti-social. They are against everything. So if, you know, we talk about America, we talk about freedom, capitalism, social mobility, to be able to strive to improve your life. You know, there is a counterculture. There are, you know, we want to call them anti-fascists that are opposed to it. If we go back and look at the 1950s, you had the yuppies, right? You had the young worldly mobile people that were trying to make money, improve their lives, become wealthy. And then the opposite of that is you had the beatniks. You had the people that were just resistant to everything in society. They had their own music. They had their own way of life. You know, that they were different. That is quite literally the definition of counterculture. The people that just do not fit in with what is going on with everybody else. And the cause for that could quite literally be anything. Could be their gender, could be where they're, you know, what their home lives are like. It could be their religion, could be their socioeconomic status. It could quite literally be anything. But for whatever reason, those people.
By the interruption, boys and girls golf practice is canceled for today. Please contact Coach Golden, Caskey, Dorfler, or Murphy if you have any questions. Again, boys and girls golf practice has been canceled today. Thank you.
For whatever reason, they do not identify, nor do they want to fit in with the mainstream culture. 2 more slides here. When it comes to I got my phone is ringing. Between the announcements and my phone ringing, sorry for the interruption. Regardless of whatever culture we're looking at, every culture is going to subscribe in some way, shape, or form to this concept called ethnocentrism. Every culture around the world is going to think that they are superior to other cultures around the world, which makes sense. If they didn't think that their way of life, their culture was the best around them, then people wouldn't do it. They wouldn't support or reinforce their values. They wouldn't support or reinforce their norms. They wouldn't continue going on through their way of life if they didn't think it was the best. Now, there are benefits to this and there are consequences to this. The fact that people think that their culture, their way of life, their values, their norms are the best makes it really easy to have a well-functioning society because everyone appreciates and believes that they have the best way of life. And because they feel that way, then they feel obligated, they feel responsible to pass on that culture, that set of beliefs, that set of values, and those subsequential norms to future generations. It makes sense. If people didn't like their culture, they wouldn't continue to do it. Thus, ethnocentrism exists, right? It supports the continuation of that culture. However, it can be dangerous. And from time to time throughout human history, we have seen what ethnocentrism does. It can lead to prejudice, it can lead to racism, it can lead to hostility, it can lead to war. The Cold War, American capitalism, freedom, independence led, that ethnocentrism that we thought we were the best led us into sustained conflict and hostility with the Soviets against communism. It led us to wars in Korea and Vietnam, throughout Latin America. Same thing can be said about World War II and World War I. We didn't call it ethnocentrism, we called it nationalism. The Germans thought they were more superior to the Slavs. White Europeans in the United States thought they were more superior to the Germans. Right? We thought America was better than Germany. The British thought they were better than, well, the British think they're better than anybody. It doesn't matter. It can lead to conflict, but there is a place and an importance of ethnocentrism. It's what keeps cultures going forward and what sustains the culture for future generations. Regardless of the culture, regardless of where we are in the world, we have cultural universals and we have cultural particulars. Every culture has universal components to their society. We all have normed behavior for reproduction, for marriage, for death, for grieving, right? We have all sorts of different shared humanistic behavior, especially when it comes to bearing children, taking care of our elders, and taking care of people who have died. But even though we all have similar, what do you want to call it? Similar components to life, how we go about those components looks completely different. And that is what the cultural particulars are. Different societies are going to have different behaviors when it comes to marriage and childbearing. Different cultures are going to have different particulars for when it comes to taking care of our dead. In the Western world, we typically bury our dead, right? In more recent years, cremation has become a thing. If you were to go to the Asian subcontinent and look at the Hindu culture, they don't bury their dead, they cremate them. They build these huge funeral pyres, right? A big floating raft made of wood, and they set it afire and send it down the Ganges, right? Cultural universal. We all do things with dead people. How we take care of our dead, two completely different things, right? That's the cultural particulars, right? We all have normed behavior for taking care of children, but that's going to look different in every single country. In the United States, most of our women work. You go into Asian countries or you go into less industrialized countries, women are going to stay home and take care of their children. Cultural universals versus cultural particulars. Cultural universals are the broad scope of how we handle different stages in life. Particulars is how we go about dealing with those things individually, and they're going to be different from one culture to the next. All right, you guys have the Sandlot video and video guide. I'm going to open this up for you. You will see that the video is embedded, right? So you'll click the link and then you'll open up the video guide, watch the video, answer the questions. That should be turned in by Thursday this week. Then you will have the chapter 3 review guide. All right. Open that up before I forget. Published. A series of questions for you to respond to. Again, that should be due and turned in on, should be turned in by Monday. If you can get it done earlier, that's great. Less work for you over the weekend. I'm done. A little bit of a longer video. My apologies. Have a great rest of the week. Enjoy the prom. Have a great weekend. And remember, there'll be a review video for you to watch on Monday if I am not here. We'll see you guys later. And as always, go Spartans.